Hey everybody, welcome to day 2 of the Guilds of Ravnica set review on the Mana Leek. I'm John, as always. Today we're going to be taking a look at all of the blue cards, and spoiler alert, I'm real excited about blue in this format, specifically blue-red. Before we jump into those cards, a couple of quick, I guess 3 quick disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1, this is a limited set review. I'm talking about draft and to a slightly lesser extent sealed, but the information is somewhat interchangeable. I'm not talking about Legacy or Canadian Highlander or Standard or Commander or anything like that. So if I say a card is bad, I mean it's bad in draft. And maybe sealed, probably sealed, not in any other format. Disclaimer number 2, I have not played with these cards yet, unless they were reprints, in which case I maybe have, but I haven't played with this format yet. So these are my first impressions on these cards, looking at them individually, looking at the format. They are how I'm going to consider these cards when I sit down with them for the first time, which actually will be a little bit early. Check out my Twitter if you want to see when exactly I'm going to be playing this format and showing you guys the draft and the sealed and etc. on Magic Arena. But disclaimer number 3, of course, is that these are my opinions. These are how I'm rating the cards. I might be right. I might be wrong. You might be right. You might be wrong. Everybody might be wrong. It's entirely possible. It's happened a lot of times. These set reviews are really meant to spur discussion with me in the comments below, with you guys amongst yourselves in the comments below. The best thing that you can do with set reviews and the start of set and grading cards is talk about them. Don't just look to one person as the truth about a set, because I don't think anybody has ever been completely correct about all aspects of a set at the beginning of it. So chat down in the comments below. But without further ado, let's get on into the first card. Up first is Capture Sphere. Capture Sphere is 3 and a blue for an enchantment aura at common. It's got flash, it's got enchant creature, of course, and when Capture Sphere enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature, and also, of course, enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. We've seen this card before, minus flash, as a bunch of different things, claustrophobia and water knot, and I'm sure there's at least another one, and there's ones that didn't necessarily tap it, etc. This is a good card at 3 mana. At 4 mana, it's probably still 100% fine and may still just be the best blue common in the set, and with flash, it's even better. This card is great. I've got a feeling it's just flat out the singular best blue common in the entire set, and I think it's going to be a first pick in many, many, many packs. Play all of these. Love this card. It's great. It's got to be a solid A- for me, just because it doesn't kill the creature, so if they do have an activated ability or some sort of static effect, it doesn't quite stop that, but it stops basically everything else. Up next is Chemistries Insight. Chemistries Insight is 3 and a blue for an instant at uncommon. Draw 2 cards and then Jumpstart. Jumpstart is Izzet's mechanic. Jumpstart says that you may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs. Then exile this card. This is not an alternative casting cost. This is just an additional casting cost. The ability allows you to cast the card as normal from the graveyard, and it has the additional cost of discarding a card. Jumpstart looks really good. The cards are actually pretty decent. In this case, it's not even overcosted. 3 and a blue for instant. Draw 2 cards is Inspiration. We've seen this card several times before, and this is exactly that card, but it's got the addition of Jumpstart. It's strictly better. And so I think this card's actually going to be totally fine. Inspiration in the sets that it's been in has often been fine. It's obviously 4 mana, which can be a little bit slow, and if the set does have some extreme aggro going on, that can be problematic. But if you have any way of stemming that aggro flow, 4 mana instant speed when you could also be holding up a bounce spell or a counter spell and you don't need it, and then you just get to draw 2 cards is amazing. Getting to do that a second time by throwing away hopefully a land, but really anything if you just desperately need those cards, is actually really good. I'm quite optimistic with Chemistries Insight. I've actually got it at a B-, assuming the format's friendly enough to it, and boy do I hope the format is friendly to it. Boros, of course, is going to be a little bit of a specter of the format, but I'm hoping it's not quite as insane as it was in M19. So B-, possibly overestimating it, but I'm pretty excited for it, for Chemistries Insight. Up next is City Watch Sphinx. City Watch Sphinx is 5 and a blue for a creature Sphinx at uncommon. It's a 5/4 with flying. When City Watch Sphinx dies, surveil 2. It's sort of like a Cloud Reader Sphinx, except with sort of life insurance instead of winning the lottery. You don't play the big flyer and scry 2, or surveil 2 in this case. You play the big flyer, and then if your opponent answers it, then you get the value. 6 mana, of course, is a little bit of a big ask, but you're definitely getting a game-ending creature for it here, so I'm totally fine there. Doesn't impact the board when it comes down, but getting that Surveil too, if they do answer it, should help you just stay in that game. All in all, I like this quite a bit. I don't know if I'm gonna first pick it. I might. Second, third pick for sure. So let's go like, I think honestly just a solid B. This card's amazing, and I think there could be packs where this is just the first pick. Dazzling Lights is up next. Dazzling Lights is a single blue mana for an instant common. Target creature gets -3/-0 until end of turn, but you Surveil 2. I guess I didn't actually talk about Surveil on City Watch Sphinx. This is the Dimir mechanic. This is Scry, except instead of top or bottom, it's top or graveyard. That's literally the only difference. This will actually play pretty well in the blue-red spells deck, which 100% exists in this format, unlike it really not existing in M19. This will save you from 3 damage, it'll trigger some of those spells matter cards that we'll get to later in this review and the red review, and you get to Surveil too. If you're not going deep on spells, and I think you can actually have a blue-red tempo aggro deck in this format as well. I don't think it's going to be quite as good as the blue-red spells deck, but I think you could go blue-red tempo aggro, or perhaps a control-y blue-black or blue-something deck. Then this is definitely going to go down in value, but probably still could sneak into decks. All in all, that's basically the difference between a C- and a C+, though. So know where you want this and if it should go in your deck or not. Devious Cover Up is up next. Devious Cover Up is 2 blue for an instant at common, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard, and you may shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library, probably cards that you've surveilled or that have otherwise died or been used. So this is, obviously designed for a super duper heavy control deck because it is 4 mana to play it. Remember, Bone to Ash in M19, for example, was kind of difficult to fit into a deck. Probably barely playable in Sealed. In Draft, I think it'll be rare for you to be correct in playing this. It's just super slow. Cancels usually not terribly playable, and this is an extra mana just to shuffle 4 cards back into your deck, which is random. You're not guaranteed to ever see any of those 4 cards. The games typically don't go long enough for you to go through your entire deck. D+, I think, except for those strong control decks where this goes up a little bit, but I don't know how often those types of decks are really going to exist. Up next is Damir Informant. Damir Informant is 2 and a blue for a creature human rogue at common. She's a 1/4, and when Damir Informant enters the battlefield, Surveil 2. She's not quite Omen Speaker. I've seen people say, aha, this is a better Omen Speaker because she surveils, which is technically better, and she's a 1/4 instead of a 1/3. But I think a massive bonus of Omen Speaker was that she was a 2-drop. You could keep those slightly sketchy 2-land hands because you had that Omen Speaker on turn 2 to solve all of your problems. There aren't really that many sketchy 3-land hands. Typically a 3-land hand is an instant keep in many situations. And of course, this coming down on turn 3 is a long time for you to, finally start fixing your plans from your sketchy keep. So I actually don't think this is quite as good as Omen Speaker. But I do still think they're quite close. Coming down that extra turn later because of that extra mana, definitely a downside. The extra toughness is cool. That'll help out a little bit unless Mentor goes out of whack. Ultimately, I think Omen Speaker would probably be like a B-, and I think Damir Informant's going to be a C+. Just being able to keep those sketchy 2-land hands were such a big thing for Omen Speaker, and missing out on that with Damir Informant, I think, does knock her down to a C+. Up next is Disdainful Stroke. Disdainful Stroke is 1 and a blue for an instant at common to counter target spell with converted mana cost 4 or greater. Which Disdainful Stroke? Disdainful Stroke. Disdainful Stroke is nice to see back for Standard, but how good is it in Limited? It's not good until it's good, and then it's good. You should probably keep this in the sideboard because you'll likely have enough matchups where this just doesn't do enough. It doesn't have enough targets. Possibly no targets if you're against a very lean Boros deck. Game 2 and Game 3, after you see those big CMC cards that you can't handle any other way, sure, throw it on in. But I'm going to keep this at a D+. I don't think I ever want to main deck this. Maybe in a blue-red Spells Matters deck, just because I'll be able to hit something, and even if it's a really dumb, 2/2 for 7 or something, at least I get that Spells Matter trigger. But in general, I think this should sit in your sideboard, so D+ for Disdainful Stroke. Up next is Dream Eater. Dream Eater is 4 blue for a creature Nightmare Sphinx at Mythic. It's a 4/3 with Flash. It has Flying. When Dream Eater enters the battlefield, surveil 4, and when you do, you may return target non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So, what's a great blue creature do? All of this, I guess. Flies, has Flash, scries, bounces. Sounds great. Throw it on a card. Done. This card's super, super solid. I can't really say much about it. It's 6 mana for a 4/3 flyer, which I guess is a tiny bit overcosted for that toughness especially, but you're surveilling 4, you're bouncing a creature, you're flashing it in, maybe eating a creature because you flashed it in as a blocker and then attacking in for 4. This is good. It's a snap first pick. It's just a straight solid A. Because it's only a 4/3, I'm not quite going to go to A+, but it's a solid, solid, solid A. Up next is Drowned Secrets. Drowned Secrets is 1 and a blue for an enchantment at rare. Whenever you cast a blue spell, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So it's a mill card. This sort of wants to be a Spells Matters card, but it's with blue spells only, and you're not going mono blue because we're in a gold set. There's only 30 blue cards in the entire set. You're not gonna be playing monocolored decks in this format, but you could be playing blue with a lot of Izzet or a lot of Dimir, which are all technically blue as well. Ultimately, though, this is probably just too cute and way too slow to be any good. 3 cards a turn, 2 for a spell and 1 for your opponent drawing, is an 11-turn clock, which is way too slow. I would love to see this work, but my instinct is that it won't. You're not going to stack these because they're rares. With Golgari in the format, this card could also just be actively bad for you in some matchups. I'm at an F on Drowned Secrets. I don't want to touch this card. Up next is Enhanced Surveillance. Enhanced Surveillance is 1 and a blue for an enchantment at uncommon. You may look at an additional 2 cards each time you surveil. Exile Enhanced Surveillance, shuffle your graveyard into your library. This may look slightly weirdly worded to you. It basically gives X for surveil +2. So surveil 4 on that Dream Eater is actually surveil 6, because that needed to be crazier, I suppose. I definitely need to see this played out to figure out if it's a thing, to figure out the rating for this card. I think it could range anywhere from awful to amazing. It's obviously going to need you to have a huge amount of surveil, and as we'll talk about especially in the rest of the set review and tomorrow's set review, surveil.deck is a thing. There are surveil payoffs. If this is only helping you out once or twice a game, I'm not sure it's worth the card and the mana spent casting this, but if you're really stacked on Surveil, I'm thinking like at least 6 to 8 cards with it, then it's going to generate you some serious value, especially if it helps you surveil into more Surveil. Ultimately, I simply have no real clue on how this is going to work. It's going to range from like an F to a B. I don't know. Very, very, very build around. The question that I'll need to keep in mind as I start the format is doing this, is it worth it? So FB, I don't know. Let's find out together in the next couple of weeks. Up next is Guild Summit. Guild Summit is 2 and a blue for an enchantment at uncommon. When Guild Summit enters the battlefield, you may tap any number of untapped gates you control. Draw a card for each gate tapped this way. Whenever a gate enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So if you haven't heard, Guild Gates are back. These are dual lands that tap for 1 of either mana, and they come into play tapped, but they have the subtype Gate, so they actually land-gate. Gate doesn't do anything, it doesn't mean anything, unless a card cares about it, and this card cares about it. There's going to be 1 in every pack. It's going to replace the basic land slot. There are no basic lands in the set. So there's going to be 24 Guild Gates at a draft table. There's no guarantee that you're going to get all of them. There's no guarantee that you're going to want all of them, because maybe they're all green-white, and you have no use for them in your blue-black deck, for example. So I don't know how these gate payoffs are really going to work. I should also note there's another gate. It's a Rupture Spire, but it's a gate. So I don't think the gate payoffs are actually going to be that good, and we'll see a couple of more later in this week. So casting this is basically a pretty narrow draw spell. I feel like on average you might get this as a divination, which I guess is okay. And then how many more gates are you going to play? I don't know how many gates you're going to have in the average deck, but I don't think it's going to be a massive number. So I'm actually going to just throw this down at an F, and I'm going to let people who draft 1,000 times try this out once when they're bored to see if it's good or not. Leapfrog is up next. Leapfrog is 2 and a blue for a creature frog at common. It's a 3/1. Leapfrog has flying as long as you've cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn. Now this is a payoff for blue-red spells at common, something M19 was massively missing. Yeah, this is obviously meant to be in blue-red spells, and I think you need to be in blue-red spells to play this. The sort of blue-red tempo aggro deck that I mentioned, you could maybe play it, but a 3/1 for 3 is just not quite good enough, I think, for that style of deck, and a Dimir control deck has no use for this. But assuming this has flying a little more often than not, it's just going to be good. It's just a solid common for the blue-red spells deck, and that makes me super happy because that, of course, means this deck exists, which is great. I'm so psyched to draft this deck. Be warned, I'm going to force this deck way too often in videos and streams, but I've got this at like a B-, I think, in the blue-red spells deck, maybe a C+ in the blue-red spells deck, and otherwise it's more of a C-, very cuttable filler creature. Up next is Maximize Altitude. Maximize Altitude is a single blue mana for a sorcery at common. Target creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn, and it's got jump start, so you can do it again if you discard a card and pay the mana cost as well. If there's one color that I can think of when I think of power and toughness boosting combat tricks, it's apparently blue, I guess. Sure, let's go with blue. Anyways, this is about as unimpactful a combat trick as you can get. +1/+1 just isn't worth it without something else like First Strike or Death Touch, which is great. Flying's okay if you can get it on a big burly creature, I guess. It's a shame that we don't have Simic in this format for this card, but I'm not sure how burly Izzet or Dimir are really going to be. Really, this feels like it should be in that Simic deck more than anything. Ultimately, I just think this is a super cuttable, very low C- range spell with the other mediocre combat tricks. It's slightly better in the Spells Matter deck just because it's really cheap ways of triggering your Leapfrog or other cards that we'll see later. But I think there's just better ways of doing that. Things that draw you cards, things that do something other than being a spell that does nothing for you. So low C- on Maximize Altitude. Up next is Mission Briefing. Mission Briefing is blue for an instant at rare. Surveil 2, then choose an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Be aware, you cannot cast this on your opponent's turn and then cast a sorcery card. It doesn't allow you to skip timing restrictions. This card doesn't. Another card that we'll talk about later does. And I'll talk about that when we get to the next card, how that works and why that works. But this card, Mission Briefing, I don't think so. Obviously, it's meant for the blue-red spells deck. Despite that Dimir art, that's not an Izzet person doing Izzet things on that card. But I just feel like the situation of getting a good spell in your graveyard, drawing this, spending 2 explicitly colored mana on this, and then still having the mana left over to cast that spell that is actually relevant just isn't gonna happen too often or be worth it. I think I'm just gonna go with an F on this. And I think it's just going to be an old-fashioned skill tester that traps new players into playing it. It reads better than it does. Don't do what Donnie don't does. Up next is Murmuring Mystic. Murmuring Mystic is 3 and a blue for a creature, human, wizard at uncommon with gorgeous art by Mark Winters, it looks like. It's a 1/5, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue bird illusion creature token with flying. Check it out! Another Spells Matter card that's not at rare. This one's at uncommon, so you're going to see those slightly less often. But anyways, I do honestly wonder if this is better than Talrand, who did this effect, but he made 2/2s, but he was a weak little 2/2 himself. Being a 1/5 means that this is going to do a great wall impression on the ground while making those flyers that, while weak, can certainly peck away for damage. I'm definitely going to start very high on this and try jamming out the Izzet Spells deck as much as possible. I'm going to start this around a B-, but of course it's a build around. You don't play this in your 18 creature deck. You don't play this in your, actually no, I think think you might play this in your hard-controlled Dimir deck, because suddenly those counter spells make birds as well. So B- on Murmuring Mystic. I think it's quite solid. Just make sure you are building around it properly. Muse Drake is up next. Muse Drake is 3 and a blue for a creature Drake at common. It's a 1/3 flyer. When Muse Drake enters the battlefield, draw yourself a card. This is fine. It's a 1/3 flyer for 4, which isn't necessarily the best. Drawing a card, that's cool. This is super definitely for the more controlling deck, and that deck will be pretty okay with this, I think. It blocks those annoying healer hawks and such. It helps you get a card back. So all in all, I think it's a fine C, maybe even a C+ in that deck. In other blue decks, I think it just kind of stays at the middle ground C level. So fine card, Muse Drake. Up next is Narco Amoeba. Narco Amoeba is 1 and a blue for a creature illusion at rare. It's a 1/1 flyer. When Narco Amoeba is put into your graveyard from your library, you may put it onto the battlefield. So, apparently controversially, and I guess I should have seen this coming because it always happens when I bash a 1/1 flyer, I didn't really care for Healer's Hawk yesterday. So what if we take Healer's Hawk and we take away Lifelink and we double the cost? Is that a good creature? No, that is not a good creature. You never, ever want to be casting Narco Amoeba. It's just massively feel bad if you're actually ever paying 2 mana for this. You want to surveil this off the top, throw it into your graveyard, and then you get to play it for free. And for all that work and all that luck of drawing things and casting things in exactly the right order, what do you get? You get a 1/1 flyer. This is just not good. This is not good. Being rare hurts even more because I'm going to open this somehow in every promo pack or something, and it's just always going to be the rare that I open. I don't think this card's good. I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I've got it at like a D-. It's just overcosted, unimpactful. I don't want it. D- for Narco Amoeba. Night Vale Sprite is up next. Night Vale Sprite is 1 and a blue for a creature fairy rogue at uncommon. She's a 1/2. With flying, when Night Vale Sprite attacks, surveil for 1. This is absolutely solid. It's been a while, but I had a bit of a history of undervaluing 1/2 flyers for 2 with an ability. Mist Intruder, I'm looking at you. Ultimately, this will be really annoying little flying pest. No one's going to want to spend a real card on killing a 1/2, and if your opponent can't get a creature in the air, there's not much they can do about it. They're going to just keep getting pinged, and more importantly, way more importantly, stop yelling at me about Healer's Hawk. They're going to get utterly buried under card advantage. I'd not be first picking this card, but I'll take it once the bombs and the removal have dried up in kind of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th pick range. I've got this at a solid B-. I think Night Vale Fairy is going to be great. Up next is Omnispell Adept. Omnispell Adept is 4 and a blue for a creature human wizard at rare. It's a 3/4. You can pay 2 and a blue and tap it. You may cast an instant or sorcery card from your hand without paying its mana cost. This one lets you cast sorcery spells at instant speed. Why? Because this one you're casting a spell as part of the resolution of an ability. For mission briefing, it simply says, hey, this turn you can cast a spell. Because it's not part of an ability, because you're not doing it as an ability resolves, but rather you're just kind of being allowed to do it whenever you feel like it, you have to obey timing restrictions. Because this is an ability, you get to skip those timing restrictions, so you can cast sorceries at instant speed. So this definitely seems interesting. This turns your sorceries into instances, and as long as you're not planning to just cast Maximize Altitudes and 1-drops for 3 mana, you could get some serious value out of this. Turning your Chemistries Insights into 3 mana spells sounds pretty great. The one downside is that this thing does cost 5 mana. It doesn't come down till turn 5. This is exactly the kind of cool card that I love and what makes me excited to be moving away from core set hell, but I don't know if you're going to get this down in time to start then pumping mana into it. I'm going to start picking it higher than I probably should just to give it a try, but I think that slowness is going to hurt it. Realistically, I think this is probably going to end up around a C+, but I'm going to start it as a B. Obviously, you need to build around it with those spells. I'm probably being too generous there, though, but I'm certainly going to give this a try at least the first 2 or 3 times that I see it. So a B for Omnispell Adept. Our next adept is Passwell Adept. Passwell Adept is 1 and a blue for a creature human wizard at common. It's a 1/3 and you can pay 2 and a blue. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. This seems great. This card is basically Girapur Guide, except it's a 1/3 instead of a 3/2, and it only costs you 2 mana. Making it cheaper than Girapur Guide and making it worse by not being able to attack, but being able to block better, it's totally fine by me. This is going to sneak through some serious beef, and I think we should count ourselves lucky that Simic isn't in this set. I think this card's just going to be super duper okay, probably right on up to the B- levels, C+ at the very least. I really like Passwell Adept. Obviously, if you're super low creature control blue deck, you maybe don't play this, but in many blue decks, I think I've got this at a B-. Up next is Quasi Duplicate, or Quasi Duplicate. Since this isn't a creature, let's go with Quasi Duplicate. Quasi Duplicate is 1 blue for a sorcery at rare. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. And you can jumpstart it a second time should you feel like it. I was hyped on this until I remembered that it's a creature you control. How's Mirror Image been doing for you in M19? For me, anyways, I've frequently had it be uncastable, or otherwise I was copying like a Sky Scanner or some other 1/2 or 1/3 or something. The value of this card goes up directly based on how many really amazing creatures you have to potentially copy. But many one-sided clone cards do tend to get stranded in your hand a lot, or otherwise super underutilized. Ultimately, this is probably fine though, because you can still cast it early and copy your 2/2 or copy your 1/4 Damir Informant, which is fine. And then because of Jumpstart, when you finally do find your good creature, you get to play it then. Because of that, I think this is probably still fine. You're not kind of stuck wasting this on something like a Sky Scan or something like a random 1/1 like you were Mirror Image, because you do get that second shot at it. So I am going to give this a B-. I don't think it's a first pick. I don't think it's a super high pick, but probably at the beginning of the mid pack is totally fine. So let's go B- on Quasi Duplicate. Up next is Radical Idea. Radical Idea is 1 and a blue for an instant at common, draw a card, and jumpstart. So 2 mana instant speed draw a card is not really something that I want to be playing. Think Twice, which obviously this is very similar to, was actually totally fine way back in the Innistrad days. It had a flashback of 2 and a blue. Being able to recast it makes it much better. And by much better, I mean it takes it from being unplayable to being fine. So if you're not taking advantage of Spells Matters, say you're in a Dimir deck or something like that, where you're just hoping for some card advantage, this is kind of at the C-. You could maybe cut it level. In the blue-red Spells Matters deck, this is going to go way up, because this is 2 triggers for your Spells Matters cards, and you're drawing 2 cards to hopefully get more Spells Matters cards, or spells to cast, or lands that you need, or whatever. So in the Spells Matters deck, this is much more like still just a C. It's still not a card where you try to draft 7 copies of them and play them all, but it's fine. Outside of that deck, this does drop down lower to like a D+. Selective Snare is up next. Selective Snare is X and a blue for a sorcery at uncommon. Return X target creatures of the creature type of your choice to their owner's hands. Boy, you gotta read cards carefully. If you're like me, you didn't quite understand what this card did. You name 1 creature type, and then X creatures of that type go away. And we're not really in a tribal set here. This is an Ixalan. You don't get to name vampires and pay a bunch of mana and, bounce the board. The best hit here is probably going to be human. Human, you might be able to hit a fair number of creatures, probably especially if it's in Boros. But again, I don't think you're going to be getting too many creatures bounced off of this. And if you do, it's basically entirely random that you end up in that situation. Now that being said, this is still 1 and a blue bounce a creature at sorcery speed, which is much less good than instant speed, unfortunately. So I do think the floor is still like kind of a C. And remember, this triggers your blue-red spells matters deck. It helps in your blue-red tempo because you get to bounce and get to attack in. Could even help in your control decks because then maybe you can counter that creature that they're going to replay, etc. So I think I'm still happy with this, just as like, I think I'm happy with this as a C+ in kind of the worst case scenario. And there are going to be those situations where you do get to like temporarily wrath the board, and those are going to be great. So C+ for Selective Snare. Up next is Sinister Sabotage. Sinister Sabotage is 1 blue for an instant at uncommon, counter target spell, Surveil 1. So this is a better Dissolve. Basically, Dissolve was 1 blue counter spell, Scry 1. This is Surveil 1. Surveil is better. This is fine. This is fine. I frequently talk in my set reviews about Cancel not really being playable in Draft, although often being slightly playable in Sealed. And the reason for that is because it's just 1 for 1. You're just trading this one card that's really hard to keep the mana up for, and you're getting their card. It's a 1 for 1. Here, you get to do the exact same thing, and for no additional cost, you also get to Surveil. You get to put a card into your graveyard if that matters, or if that card is worthless. You get to keep that card on top if it's going to be really good next turn. That's a huge amount of value to add into that, and that actually turns this into a playable limited counterspell. Now, it's still not amazing. It's still just like a C, maybe a C+, but that might even be a little bit too generous. But it's not unplayable like a lot of counterspells are. Up next is Thoughtbound Phantasm. Thoughtbound Phantasm is a single blue mana for a creature spirit at uncommon that apparently doesn't say flying anywhere. It's a 2/2 with Defender. Whenever you Surveil, put a +1/+1 counter on Thoughtbound Phantasm. As long as Thoughtbound Phantasm has 3 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it can attack as though it did not have Defender. So again, just a reminder, doesn't have flying. Apparently, despite the fact that it is floating in the art, those little tendrils must be firmly gripped to the ground, I guess. I don't like this art. I mean, I like this art. I don't like the art being evocative of the mechanics. So anyways, repeat after me. Doesn't fly. So this is interesting. I don't want to waste removal on a 2/2 wall. I probably don't want to waste removal on a 3/3 wall. A 4/4 wall is pretty annoying. And then whoops! Suddenly our opponent's got a 5/5 that can attack me that they cast way back on turn 1. I really, really want to try the Surveil Matters deck out. There are some cool payoffs like this one, for example, and some more that we'll see later in the week. But I don't think you take this too early because nobody's going to want it if they're not the Surveil deck. This is an F if you have 2 or 3 or even 4 Surveil cards in your deck. You just don't play this card. But if you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 more Surveil cards, this card becomes pretty darn good because it's just an unassuming 1-drop that's going to become kind of a decent wall and then suddenly one heck of a big attacker. So this is like an F or maybe like a B-. It depends entirely on your deck, but I do think you pick it relatively late because nobody else is going to want it. Up next is Unexplained Disappearance. Unexplained Disappearance is a 1 and a blue mana for an instant at common. Return target creature to its owner's hand, Surveil 1. This is my favorite card from Theros. My most drafted card from Theros was Voyage's End. You'll hear me say this a lot. With Surveil, there are a lot of cards that are just Theros cards that say Surveil instead of Scry. This is Voyage's End, which was 1 and a blue, bounce, Scry 1. So yeah, this is great. This was my most drafted card in Theros. I've got a strong suspicion this might be my most drafted card in Guilds of Ravnica. 2 mana, instant speed bounce. I love it. The Surveil, awesome. I'm going to draft this as much as possible. This is a B-. This is amazing. This is going to be great in the Spells Matters deck. This is going to be great in a more sort of tempo aggro deck. This is going to be solid in the control deck to buy you time to maybe do the old bounce and then counter trick that control decks do really well. I love Unexplained Disappearance. B-. In my heart, it's an A. Up next is Vidalcan Mesmerist. Vidalcan Mesmerist is 1 and a blue for a creature Vidalcan Wizard. At common, it's a 2/1, and whenever Vidalcan Mesmerist attacks, target creature an opponent controls gets -2, -0 until end of turn. So this blue guy's fine. It'll help the blue-red deck that didn't really get there on the Spells Matters and needs to be a little bit more of a tempo aggro deck by attacking in and eating bears and eating pikers because suddenly they are 0-1s or 0-2s. Still, that's at its best. It is still just like a C- that you should probably cut in most decks more often than not, and definitely don't go out of your way to pick it. I really do think it's kind of a backup plan for when the blue-red spells part of the deck doesn't really quite come together. So C- for Vidalcan Mesmerist. Up next is Wall of Mist. Wall of Mist is 1 and a blue for a creature wall at common. It's an 0-5 defender. We just had it in M19, and now we've got it here again. It's going to hold off the ground a little bit against Boros, although holding the ground isn't a great plan if your opponent's going off with Mentor, because sure, this blocks that 3-3, and then that 3-3 is a 4-4, and then if you're unlucky, that 3-3 becomes a 5-5 somehow. Although, of course, there's not that many gigantic Mentors to do that, but there are some. And of course, combat tricks and other ways of getting counters could perhaps boost them up somehow. Anyways, I'm not a big fan of putting down an 0-5 wall and saying, haha, I'm holding off aggro, because they go around it. Aggro decks don't play one creature and then just hit them into the wall over and over. They play a bunch of creatures, and one creature goes into the wall every turn, and the others just keep hitting you. So be careful with this. Don't just put it in your deck and say, aha, I've got the answer to aggro, because you don't. This is like a D+. There's going to be some decks that want it if they're being heavy control and going a really late game, but those are going to be really, really, really specific decks. Generally, you just should not be playing a Wall of Mist. So D+ for Wall of Mist. Our second last blue card is Watcher in the Mist. Watcher in the Mist is 3 blue for a creature spirit at common. It's a 3/4 flyer, and when Watcher in the Mist enters the battlefield, surveil 2. So this is just Cloud Reader Sphinx, of course. The poster Sphinx of blue common flyers these days. 5 mana, 3/4 flyer, surveil 2 is just going to be absolutely great. A bad pack could have this as the first pick, and it's a very high pick after that. This is just a solid B+. This could end games over multiple turns. You're going to get that 2 surveil. It's not that overcosted. Solid, solid, solid card. B+ for Watcher in the Mist. And going way down from Watcher in the Mist is Wishcoin Crab, our final card for blue. 3 and a blue for a creature crab at common. It's a 2/5 with the flavor text. What wishes do they grant? Well, mostly pinching related ones. Yeah, this is, I guess, slightly better than Wall of Mist, because this will eat those bears that it's blocking, but those bears will have gotten in for multiple turns by the time you finally get this 4-drop down. This doesn't seem that good. I'm just super duper not sold on Wishcoin Crab. Again, like Wall of Mist, there's going to be those really rare, really heavy control, really late game decks where this maybe could be played, but in general this is going to be a D-. The fact that it costs 4 mana means that aggro has had such a long time to set up and hit you in the face that this is going to be way too little, way too late. So I'm totally out on Wishcoin Crab. I've got it at a D-. I never, ever, ever really want to play it. But anyways, that's going to wrap up blue for Guilds of Ravnica. I'm super excited for blue. I'm going to talk a lot more about this when red comes around, but I'm going to draft the heck out of blue-red Spells Matters. There's so many cool things to do with it. There's uncommon payoffs. There's common payoffs. There are some really cool rare payoffs, and just a whole bunch of spells to get value. And then beyond that, there's Surveil with Dimir. Surveil looks amazing. For those who will certainly be asking, I'm probably going to lean towards doing a pre-release as Dimir and doing a pre-release as Izzet, because I'm really super excited about blue. Let me know what you think of blue, what you're excited for in blue, what you agree with me, what you disagree with me. Chat with me, chat with each other down in the comments below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at the Mana Leek. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can find me at facebook.com/ShamanALeek, twitch.tv/ShamanALeek, where I said I will be playing Magic Arena a day earlier as part of a big streamer event that WotC has invited me to and given me a count with all the cards and a whole bunch of gems to play, so check that out. You can also find me at patreon.com/ShamanALeek. If you want to go over to inkedgaming.com and buy yourself a playmat or some sleeves or a hoodie or any other accessories that they sell, you can use the coupon code MANALEEK10, all one word, 10 as the numbers 10, to save 10% off your order and help out the channel a little bit. Anyways, if you like the content, click that thumbs up button. Click subscribe if you want to see more. And if you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all tomorrow for the black set review.